Racism. As a white person, you're barely allowed to open your mouth on Aboriginal issues lest you be called a racist by somebody. There's no doubt that a young Aboriginal person living in an Aboriginal community, especially a remote community and especially a girl, the best advice that you could give them is to leave that community. Go to a larger country town or a city, get yourself an education, escape the sexual abuse, escape the personal violence. The girls in the APY lands in South Australia now do not even bother reporting sexual abuse or violence on them because they know it's a waste of time. And yet when someone like me stands up about it, they immediately try to shout you down and call you a racist. 40 years of self-determination simply hasn't worked. As a matter of fact, it's true that Aboriginal communities were actually better off when they were being patronised by the missionaries. At least they had good health, good food, good education, and many of them actually worked their way out of that process. Whereas right now what we have is sexual abuse, personal violence, subjugation of the girls certainly and the boys as well, exposure to alcohol, drugs, petrol sniffing, and these are almost certainly going to perpetuate the very poor life that Aboriginal people have, and we have no hope whatsoever of closing the gap until we're allowed to talk about these things. And of course, people like me are not allowed generally to talk about it because I'm white, therefore I can have no opinion about black affairs. The recent Closing the Gap report that came out in 2017, like a few minutes ago, there's only one area which is said to be improving. Now that's the area of Aboriginal youth up to 24 years old completing Year 12. That's said to be improving. But I wish that the reporters who lapped up the government publicity would actually read the bloody report, because when you read it you can see they've actually changed the target. The target for that particular parameter is not closing the gap, it's now closing half the gap. It's not Year 12, it's Year 12 or equivalent. Now I can't imagine that's actually brain surgery, it'd be fence post digging or driving a ute or something as a Year 12 equivalent. And it doesn't even actually measure completion. They say in the footnotes we're not measuring completion because we only have records of commencement. So when they hold this up as getting towards a target, what they should actually be saying is, anybody who's read the report, there's been some commencement but no completion measured of not Year 12 but something like Year 12, and it's moving towards maybe half the gap in a few years but nobody knows quite how long in time. That's the sort of complete nonsense that's coming out on Aboriginal issues because we're not allowed to talk about the real facts. And if we did talk about the real facts, that would be racist. So no reporters are going to report that because they don't want to go down the path that Andrew Bolt went down when he tried to report about the difference between fair-skinned or white-skinned Aborigines and the real people who should have been targeted by the benefits and awards if they were in fact necessary, and he said they weren't because they're racist anyway. Instead what happens is the reporters focus on and reporting quite positively on this proto-nationalist Aboriginal movement, which is extreme racist. In Australia, we find racism at its worst in Aboriginal Australian politics. There are these people who have the slightest bit of DNA to distinguish them, they say, from the rest of us, and they push it for the purpose of political and financial advantage. I say, and there's plenty of anthropological authority for this, if you look like me, you are not a different biological race to me. It's a social and political construct. Race is the least best way to distinguish between people. Superficially, you can look at black skin, fuzzy hair, fat lips, but they're the least most important things about difference between humans when you look at the science of it. Character, intelligence, physical capacity, mental capacity, and variation in these factors are far more appearance than skin colour. And most of us are getting over that. Aboriginal activists are not. They're highly racist. Our government, in fact, funds this racist group. Right now, there are meetings going around the country about recognition and whether or not there should be treaties and so forth. And we all know it's going to end up in Alice Springs, and we all know what they're going to say. Because we're seeing reports as coming out as they go around. They want a completely separate new state in Australia for Aboriginal people. That's where they come out right and say it if you read the reports. They want an Aboriginal state controlled by Aborigines of the slightest amount of DNA, but nobody without it. And they want self-determination and autonomy within that state. But they're already openly saying that it will need to be funded by the rest of Australia because they know that it won't have the capacity to economically support itself. It is funny, isn't it? But it's actually true. That's what they're saying if you follow what they're putting out. I say these races have to be opposed. There's no room for the division of Australia by race. We've been there, done that, we've passed it, we're through it. I say no to appeasing them. That's why I oppose constitutional recognition, and I certainly oppose any treaties. But it's time, as Andrew Bolt actually got persecuted for, to ask questions about this. But if you do, you get labelled a racist. It's not okay to articulate an opposing point of view. I say a new Australian state based on racism is bad per se. I don't think it's racist to say that. I think it's racist to propose it. Now, some will use section 18C to close that argument down. Some Aborigines will say their feelings are hurt, that they are offended by it. I say the section 18C is unconstitutional, by the way, insofar as it interferes with the democratic process of political free speech. The federal court says that in Gaynor's case. So that hasn't yet been tested. It wasn't tested in Bolt's case. It never went that far. The problem with 18C is it masks the difference. It blurs a line. It permits political opponents to use it as a sword instead of ordinary people who are being offended or insulted on the basis of their race, using it as a shield. It's been used against people like Andrew Bolt, Bernard Gaynor, Queensland University technology students, Bill Leake, and me, in fact, under the disguise, and it's a disguise of personal offence and personal hurt feelings, political opponents are targeted. And yet, when real racist offence occurs, nothing is done. I use the example of a banana being thrown onto the footy ground in front of an Aboriginal footballer. This is an act clearly and obviously got just one purpose. There's no political benefit. It's designed to insult and offend a human being by comparing him to an ape, and here's a banana. That's what it's for. It's an offensive behaviour by ordinary community standards. You don't need section 18C for it. Our ordinary criminal law, which says you can't behave offensively or use offensive language, is quite adequate. But no prosecution, no legal process, no claim for thousands and thousands of dollars. An important point to be made here, I think, is that the community should have protected Eddie Betts from that. It shouldn't have been left up to him to take it on the chin and say, oh, well, you know, I'm used to it, I've had worse than that. Our law enforcement agencies let us down. It's not up to individuals to enforce community standards of offensive public behaviour. And this is where section 18C blurs the lines again. It says that individuals who have hurt feelings, individuals who are offended, have some legal standing to make a claim against people, and that should not be so. This whole section has to go. It's too dangerous for a number of reasons.